You've been training hard, and you've been training consistently. You put in the work, you put in the effort. But the question nobody asks is if you're training correctly according to your goal. 99% of the people that go to the gym trying to build muscle are actually training for endurance, and they don't even realize it. Different goals in the gym will require different training. And if your goal is to build more muscle, you're in the right place.
Once your goal is sharply but realistically defined, all that remains is carrying out your plan. In other words, you'll never know how good you might have become unless you try. So let's get with it.
Alright, y'all, coming up strong with another chapter on Mike Mentzer's heavy duty training book. Today we're going to talk about specificity, meaning the combination of two principles that we already talked about, the identity principle and the intensity principle. So just by mentioning the name, specificity, what do you think it talks about? Given the context that our goal here is solely to build more muscle, there is a goal that we have to achieve. And because we know that goal, there's a specific path you have to take to achieve that goal. So if you want to train to build more muscle, you train a certain way. If you want to get more endurance, you train another way. So let's break down the concept of specificity. There's two building blocks. Identity. Everything that exists has a nature, meaning that you have to act in accordance to your nature. Sounds silly, but if I were to step outside and try to fly, I wouldn't be able to, because it's not in humans' nature to be able to fly. It's such a powerful concept, but it just sounds so weird talking about it. But anyways, when it comes to bodybuilding, our identity as humans makes us behave in a way that we accomplish a certain goal. And within the identity principle, there's the law of causality, so cause and effect. You do something, you get something from it. You do something else, you get something different. So based on our identity as humans, we need to follow certain principles to get a specific outcome. And when it comes to building muscle, that's high intensity training. So because of our nature, we need a specific stimulus to cause muscle growth. And now, that's where the second principle comes into play, which is the intensity principle. The stimulus has a nature, and that's of high intensity, because it needs to be intense enough to trigger the muscle growth mechanism. And if you're here from previous videos, you're probably wondering, are you going to talk about anything different? Yes, I'm going to be more specific about how intense you could go to see any result and to maximize results. And I'm also going to talk about 4 different techniques that you have to use to have a high intensity workout. Even though I don't really like rule of thumbs, they're good for direction. They're good to give the general idea, right? Mike's rule of thumb here is 50% of your capacity. If you're able to reach that, you're going to see some growth. Less than that, it's not intense enough. So if you're able to curl for 1 rep max, 100 pounds, and you do a curl with 50 pounds, sure, you're going to trigger some growth. Or even in the opposite way. If you're able to do 10 reps with 50 pounds, but you only do 5, okay, you can still see some improvement, but you're not maximizing improvement at all. The only way to maximize the improvement in terms of muscle growth is to get as close as possible to 100% effort. And what is 100% effort? Going to failure. That is with a lightweight, that is with a heavyweight, it doesn't really matter. Failure is the most important component. And that's a debate that I see a lot. Should I do lightweight or heavyweight? Well, really it doesn't matter. You should be able to go to failure with a lightweight and with heavyweights. For me, it's finding the balance, right? Heavy enough that I don't have to do 100 reps to get to failure, but not too heavy that I'm going to failure with the first rep. It's not really reasonable. The goal is to hit at least 5 reps and then get to failure. Less than that, you're moving to powerlifting. There's a lot of risk in terms of injuries, and our goal here is to build muscle safely too. Not only build muscle, but build it safely. But when you think about doing higher reps, over 20 reps, over 30 reps, it's just the thought in itself is really exhausting. Imagine you try to do 30 reps in any major movement, like a bench press or a squat. Do you think you can handle that? Well, a lot of people say they can, but then you're going to failure on the 30th rep, meaning that it's not going to be a quick 30 reps. And I don't believe any 30 reps is quick, but you get the idea. I think you're going to be super tired, so you might not even be able to get to 30. You're probably going to stop before because your cardiovascular system is failing before the actual muscle failure, which is our goal, right? We want the muscular failure, not the cardiovascular failure. And not only that, it's already hard to go to failure with a low rep range, 6, 8, 10. Doing that when you're in your 30th rep, you gotta be like a fucking warrior, dude. Like you're 100% out of the curve. That's like some Tom Platz shit. Squatting 315 for 45 reps. Yeah, that's just like psycho behavior. And if you're able to do that, dude, I praise you, I admire you, because I've tried to do something like that. Of course, not 315 for 45 reps, I can't do that. But it gets harder and it's not as practical to go over a certain amount of reps and go to failure. So try to find your balance. For legs, I always go higher, 15, 20, 25. But that's on like single leg press, leg extensions, and still 20 is usually my max. But that's my personal preference, and it comes from experience. My heart rate, how long I take to recover, the psychological aspect like I said. So for you to see any change, Mike says you need at least 50% of your maximum capacity. But the closer you get to 100%, the more growth you experience, if you rest appropriately. And then we go back to that old conversation. If you want to hit 100% effort, do you think you can do that for a long time? Do you think you can sprint for hours? You can't. You have to do it briefly. Not because it's a rule, but because physically, 100% capacity is not sustainable over a long period of time. Mike created a graph for his own seminars, and I'm going to put it on the screen there. So we got a pretty simple graph here, and it just shows the relationship between the fatigue, so the endurance time on the x-axis, and the power intensity generated during a given workout. The greater the power intensity, the less the endurance. Then this really takes me back to the tutoring lessons that I used to run when I was in college. I was an economics tutor for a really long time while I was in college. So, good memories, man, good memories. And you can see that the further out you go on the time axis, the least effort you notice. Minimal intensity effort is at the 2-hour mark. So to maximize muscle growth, you need to maximize intensity. And maximizing intensity means that you're working out briefly because you cannot exert a lot of power during a long period of time. You are able to train to failure for a long time, but the extent to which you can generate 100% capacity is going to be lower every time. So your 100% in the beginning of the session will be so much greater than the 100% that you give at the end of the session that really you're just building so much fatigue. If anything, what I would advise is, if you want to do a long workout and you still want to see muscle growth, you shouldn't train to failure. That's not a recommendation because my view is if you want to gain muscle, you need to train hard to failure. That's the motto here. But if you're not convinced and you still want to do a lot of workouts and a lot of volume, don't go to failure so frequently. You're going to get fried physically and systemically. Don't do that. So to maximize the intensity of the workout, we need to get as close as possible to maximum muscle contraction. And there are 4 ways to do so. Starting a movement in a fully extended position, perform all the movements in a controlled manner. No momentum here. Full range of motion is mandatory. And the 4th, use enough resistance so that your muscle actually activates. If that's lightweight, you're going to be there for a long time until you go to failure. If it's too much of a heavy weight, you're not recruiting enough. So find your balance. Heavy enough that you can get at least 5 good reps, but not too heavy that you're going within the powerlifting range. And if you're going too light, I don't advise that because odds are you're not going to get to failure. First, if you want to get the maximal contraction possible, your movements should start in a fully extended position. That's a neurological stimulus called the myotatic reflex. When the muscle's in a fully extended position, there are sensory receptors called spindles that send a signal to the central nervous system. What does the central nervous system does? For you to avoid overstretching your muscle and hurting yourself, there's a signal that's sent to the muscle so that it can contract more fibers and avoid that overstretching. That's the myotatic stimulus. The second technique to get maximum muscle contraction is to conduct your movement at a controlled pace. You don't want momentum involved because momentum is just an external force, meaning that the force that your muscle was supposed to be doing isn't coming from it.
Slow. We don't want any slightest trace of momentum coming into play. Remember, momentum is an outside force. We don't want that brought. Very good.
That's the famous swinging. You want to focus all the effort in the muscle that you're working so that you can get the maximum contraction possible. In this topic, there's a discussion of fast twitching muscle fibers, slow twitch muscle fibers, and then again, you have to conduct the movement in a controlled manner. That's all. It's not about doing it super slow or super fast. My take is if you're doing the concentric part, you should go faster. You contract fast. Boom. But for you to maximize growth, you need to hold peak contraction like we talked. That's the static motion. And then lower the weight or the eccentric part slower so you can control the movement. Third technique comes from the first. So starting at a fully stretched position to get the maximal contraction means that you have to get the best range of motion you can possibly get. Full range of motion is much more important than just keep increasing weight. Because if you're not doing full range of motion, you're not contracting all the fibers that you can. So adding more weight is just going to make you overstress certain fibers and not work on others.
Seconds. In the completely contracted position, hold the weight momentarily, and then lower the weight slowly. The negative phase, or lowering of the weight, should take close to 4 seconds to complete. Repetitions performed in this manner will apply resistance through a full range of motion.
And this is why I talk about this every time. Progressive overload is super important, but only after you've maximized the basics. You have the control of the movement in check, you have the range of motion in check, only then you're able to increase the weight. That's the proper way to do progressive overload. And then the fourth is that the resistance that you apply to the muscle must be sufficient enough for the fibers to activate. I believe it was my third video where I showed Dorian Yates doing a leg extension set. There's a moment where the reps start slowing down, and that's your signal that you're starting to get in the growth zone per se. Maximum muscle contraction is going to be involved in going to failure. So the movement slowing down is just showing you that you're recruiting the fibers and they are working. So they're getting weaker as you go because you're using a lot of its capacity to contract, which is our goal. The maximum capacity is the ultimate goal, but no one gets to 100%. And that ties to the discussion that we just had with lightweight versus heavyweight. If you're using too light of a weight, you're going to be there for hours until your reps start slowing down. You can even experience that burn that you think is good for growth, but it has nothing to do with growth. When your body slows down the movement, it's not like you're actively choosing to do so. You just can't do it faster. The movement slowing down by itself, that's a signal that you're getting close to failure. That burn is just lactic acid accumulating in your muscle because you're doing too much probably. Later in the book, we're going to talk about exercises, workout plans, and then we're going to approach the resistance aspect again, because there's different types of resistance across the different stages of the movement. There's the static, concentric, eccentric, right? We know that. So for example, if you're not having any resistance at the top portion of the movement or the static portion, like in a barbell curl, when you reach the top of the position, there's no tension in your biceps. So you really shouldn't be engaging in that. There's strategy behind the movement after you understand the resistance. And again, we're going to talk about that in more detail later. That's it for this chapter, guys. Hope you understand a little bit more of the details of intensity and how to actually make your workouts more intense, more effectively. That's my goal here. And then the next video, we're going to have another principle that's going to make us understand even better the mechanism of muscle growth. Thanks so much, guys. See you then. Peace.